Well, good morning.
Good morning.
When was the last time we saw each other?
Gosh, it's been a while, hasn't it?
2014, maybe?
What about that? Yeah.
Yeah. So before I have you introduce yourself, I'd just like to situate ourselves where we are in the gospel
Okay.
and where we are in the church year.
Yeah.
So this is the season of Pentecost.
Yes.
So we celebrated Pentecost, and we realized that though we think of the Spirit as something that comes to comfort us, often the Spirit comes as something to surprise us, right?
Right.
And then the next Sunday, and I was wrong on this, I thought it was the second Sunday of Pentecost. It wasn't. It was Trinity Sunday, okay? And we celebrated the Great Commission about Matthew telling Jesus to make disciples and go into the nations and make them followers of Jesus. But we realized that if you didn't look at that gospel lesson alongside of the greatest commandment to love your neighbor as yourself,
Right.
then we were doing that type of converting nations, and that's really not what Matthew was getting at.
Right.
Then after that, we had the second Sunday, and we hear the story of Jairus' daughter being raised from the dead, a little girl around puberty age,
Yep.
and then a woman intervenes as Jesus is going to the house to heal her, and the woman has had a hemorrhage for 12 years. And she touches Jesus' cloak, and she's healed. Her faith has made her well. But we realized that in Matthew's gospel, there was a great cry for people to realize how women were situated in a patriarchy type of culture that kept them oppressed. So we looked at body autonomy and how Jesus was uplifting women. And then the last Sunday was the harvest, about the harvest. And for a long time, churches taught that the harvest meant to go out and bring people into the church and gather the harvest for the church, where in fact the Hebrew scripture, the word harvest, is about justice. It's about doing justice. And today we're situated with some of Jesus' sayings about what it means to follow him. The disciples want to know what it's really like.
Yeah.
So before I start with the poem, Tori, would you introduce yourself?
Tori Eaton, and I have my doctorate in occupational therapy. I'm a mom and a wife, and have worked a lot in justice issues around houselessness at the Forest Grove United Church of Christ. And what else? Worked with a lot of highly stigmatized populations just by nature of life. My parents raised me, although we didn't go to Christian church growing up. They raised me in community service is an important piece of life.
That's what I think I so appreciated when I was at Forest Grove. I really, in the beginning, I was questioning you're not always being present on Sunday morning, right? As a new pastor, you want to meet these new people and everything, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
And then when I heard about how you were out in the world working with how you work with oppressed people on the margins and everything, I was like, wow. And then I realized that you did bring back all of that experience back into the church in ways that made sense to you. And that's what I like about the young people today. Not everybody is going to fall into that same category of doing church the way it once was done.
Right.
And you really, for me, really were an example of doing church in a new way. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
And then we met Emberly today. Nobody's keeping her silent.
No, she's not being kept silent at all.
Yeah. So I'd like to read a poem to you. It's entitled, "Injustice is Always a Quiet Thing." It's a sonnet for the American uprising. Injustice is always a quiet thing, interested only in more power. Injustice carves through hope's feathery wing. It cuts through heart and pretends not to sting. As it approaches its final hour, injustice is always a quiet thing. All of the Nazi thugs to which they cling cannot protect the rich up in their tower. Injustice carves through hope's feathery wing. A time for continuous reckoning, when fake promises have grown too sour. Justice has never been a quiet thing. We rise and convention does not cling. Rebellion has come with a red flower. Justice stitches up hope's feathery wing. All of us need this American spring. History has built us to this hour. That's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Justice has never been a quiet thing. Justice stitches up hope's feathery wing. So let's look at the scripture and the poem and hear from you what you resonated with and what maybe you've got,
Sure.
feathers up a little bit or you didn't like.
Well, so first, I think the scripture in general, when you first sent it to me, I had a real gut reaction. I grew up in rural Washington County, and because I didn't grow up in a Christian church. My dad's an atheist. My mom's God's everywhere. Why bother going to church? It's hypocritical. There's all these people problems that happen. So just enjoy God in everything.
In everything, yeah.
And in school, because I wasn't the churchgoer, I got a lot of, well, if you don't follow God, you're a horrible person.
Yeah.
And so I read this and I was like, yeah, cool. It was hard. And I'm trying to think, is there a part of this that I really like? And I realize if we step back and think of Jesus to ruffle feathers, he was like, the status quo isn't working, right? We're not here to please the status quo. I'm here to say, this isn't working anymore.
Right.
And if we get on board as Christians, as following Jesus in that way of saying, yeah, we're not here for the status quo. We're here to ruffle feathers and to say stuff is not working anymore and it's unjust.
Even our services are meant not for the people sitting here, they're meant for the outsiders who walk through the doors.
Yeah. Then I will call myself a Christian.
Yeah.
But I was taught the other way.
Right, and I thought I was being so contemporary by using the message, right? I figured the language is going to be much better than the RNSV.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is as bad as the other one. And what happened was, and I was speaking to Diana before, that I feel that it is hyperbole. It's a real extreme taking a side on speaking against the status quo. Yeah. But it's done in a way that no matter how you look at it, it sets up we against them.
It
and
does.
That's the excuse me, that's the part that I find really irritating.
Yeah. It's us against them. If you can't be this, then you can't be that.
Right.
And it's about we.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You don't really get a sense in any of this that though Jesus was looking to shake up the status quo, right? That was what he was doing. Yeah. He was still looking to reconcile all things to the one body.
Yeah.
And that means taking people where they're at, right?
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it can be used, this can be used, I think, as a weapon towards people like it was for you.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine how it's used against LGBTQ plus people.
Hugely. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And yet I know I know a handful of members of the LGBTQ community that really bring that social justice piece,
of course,
forward. I think about my experience. So I'm a cisgendered woman. I live a heteronormative life. I'm married to a cisgendered man. We have a child. So I look very straight on the outside. But when I came out as bisexual in high school, I didn't know the term pansexual at the time. I was a straight A student. I was an honor student. Doing well in school was important to me. I was hauled into the principal's office and told if I talked about my sexuality, I'd be given detention. And I was a people pleaser. I was already on the fringes of, I didn't go to church, so I wasn't an okay person. And I was like, detention for being me and for saying, hey, we need to talk about this. For asking in our health class, in our sex ed class about like, hey, let's talk about, can we get resources for safety for same-gendered interactions? And the teachers' eyes were huge, and they're like, if you ever mention that again, you're out of my class, you flunk. And this was 25 years ago. but this was the same time that Matthew Shepard was killed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it was big.
Yeah,
It was
and
big.
that brings me to something that really stuck out when Diana did a fabulous reading of this.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "You don't deserve me.
Right.
You don't deserve me." I mean, even the most contemporary, well thought out, intentional rendition of this interpretation fails so hugely. You don't deserve me.
Right.
Just by the nature of who you are, you don't deserve me, or by the choices you make for your life, you don't deserve me.
Right.
Yeah. And then we come to the poem.
Yeah, this poem hit me in a really good. I had to really sit with it and think it, and read it a few times, because the first line, "Injustice is always a quiet thing." I was like, no, it's not. To who? Have
Right,
you talked to
right.
somebody who's experienced injustice? And then I realized, like, on a systemic level, it is.
It is.
It's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
quiet.
it's very
It's
quiet.
the way things are.
Mhm.
Oh, we've always done it this way, so we're going to keep doing it this way. So in a way, it is very quiet. And then I think about, the American Rising, right? The American Spring Rising at the end, and I think about the Arab Spring. It started kind of quiet,
Mm-hmm.
and it just got big. And I was like, this is where we're at. This is what we need, is the quiet, the grassroots, and then
it looks pretty, right? Injustice
looks
looks
so
beautiful.
nice,
Like
yeah.
just we'll open our doors, come on in,
Yeah.
and this is how we do it, and just be quiet and come along with us. You fit in, but you
Right.
don't belong.
but you don't.
No piece of you really belongs.
Yeah. And then that idea of it being this feathery wing, I'm like, I like the imagery, it's pretty, but then I started thinking, well, if you think about wings as they're interlocking
Mm-hmm.
and how they function,
Mm-hmm.
when things get out, their feathers are unruffled or a wing is damaged, it can't work. It can't work well. But when you get everything working together, the wind, it moves through in such a beautiful way.
It moves through.
Yeah,
right?
and
Not
so
against.
then thinking about that stitching, that wing together, bringing that justice in, then you bring all the parts together,
Mhm,
and then it can
mhm.
move through and move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I really,
Neat poem.
again, the
What were you
part that
thinking?
said, history built us to this hour.
Yes.
Yeah, we're here, and we can't go back.
No.
And
I think there's-
everybody's like pining, like, yeah.
There's too much in history for us to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
And with all that we have with social media and the internet and whatnot, I'm not an expert on this, but especially technology, I'm actually a technophobe. Like, oh God, Facebook again. But there's such a rich opportunity
Mm-hmm.
for us to say, no, we've been here in these dark
Right.
times. We've been here in these ignorant times. We've been here where people were judged because they were different. Why are we choosing to go back to that?
Right.
And why are we an us versus theming? It's a we. If we as human beings want to move forward in a way that gets people uplifted and served and their basic needs met and humanity thrives, it's no longer us versus them.
Mhm.
That's just going to keep
It
bringing us
doesn't
down.
work that way.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah.
And I just think about, and you see it in the news constantly, about the banning of the books.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me crazy. And I really feel that every church, if we're doing our job,
Mm-hmm.
needs to be speaking out against that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
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 And how about our illustration? What did you find interesting or?
I actually really liked it. I printed a copy of it out because the hummingbird is so quiet unless you're sitting there in the
I
silence.
was thinking the complete opposite because
Were
every
you?
time I spot a hummingbird, I hear it before I see it
Okay.
because it will come so close to me sometimes that you hear that little twitter. Yeah.
But you have to be around quiet for that to happen.
Well, I am
yeah,
around.
yeah, you're
yeah,
around
yeah,
quiet. I mean, I am when I go out to my parents' place. They're out in the country, and so I think about. Yeah, you can hear the hummingbirds. They're
Yeah.
very loud,
Mhm.
and there's this tiny little
Vibration.
thing and this
Yeah.
vibration, and their hearts are beating 600 times a minute or something like that. And to me, it's a really good symbol for justice.
Mhm.
Actually, I think of that because they're doing this work, and they're alerting.
Mhm,
If you're in town, you don't always hear a hummingbird, and so you just see it, and it's just the shock. Oh, cool! There's a hummingbird. Look at that. But when you're in the quiet, You can hear it coming. And I feel like we're at that precipice.
Right. That vibration.
Yeah,
that
and the
vibration
colors of that vibrancy of exploding colors.
I had an interesting thing happen the other week. I was outside watering my garden, and I had it on stream. So I was streaming into a red tree. We have a red leaf tree in the back. And all of a sudden, I started to hear a hummingbird. I'm like, well, maybe it's the hose, maybe it's the water I'm hearing. Sure enough, this little hummingbird had come right up to where I was watering from at the front of the hose, like just a couple of inches from my face. And it was so curious about what was going on.
Wow.
And I just stayed there, and I watched it. And it went on for almost like 5 or 10 minutes, that it was something that tiny, right, was able to be that curious about something that forceful.
Yeah.
So what it was doing was it would come in, get a little bit of water, and then back off. And come in and get a little bit of water and back off. And I thought, I said, if we spiritually embrace these very difficult times, with that curiosity, come in, get a little bit, and then back off. Because like I said to you in the front before, it's tiring work.
Totally.
Yeah. And the older we get, we think we're entitled to just like slack off, and we've done our job. And I get all of that because I'm in that category too, right?
Right.
But it's just that there is so much intensity that we have to really, I think, make an intentional effort to refuse to be silent.
Yeah, and I think that idea of coming in and getting some and then getting back and refreshing is huge because...
Well, that's the spiritual component of the prophet, right? That's the prophetic voice.
Yeah, and it's necessary. I co-led the severe weather shelter at Forest Grove for at least 6 years, maybe a little bit more. Every winter, we were there. I was there probably at least 12 hours a week on top of my working 40 plus hours a week job. And I would remember that the season would finish in March and I'd just be exhausted. Here I was prepping for volunteers, training and everything, and I would put everything off until the last minute of the next October because it was just, I was tired. And then after 6 years of doing that, it was like, oh, got to take a break. And now people are coming in and they're like, oh, Tori, you worked with all these houseless issues. Like, we need you here because they're putting up these new pods. And I'm like, I did, no offense, I did that. The level of anger is so much higher than it was. And I did it solid for 6 years. So I'm like, time to do something different on a different front, recharge, and also still speak out. When there are comments on the page that I'm on sometimes about this versus them and not acknowledging all the complexity of the issues around houselessness, I speak up. Because how can you not? But I'm not going to also be the one at the very front. So it's that balance. It's a balance.
And that's what we kind of see with the micro village, right? With the staffing of the micro village, because it is such intense work. That's part of their challenge, is to learn how to lean in and then back off. You know? And on a day-to-day basis, that's really intense, very challenging work. But I think
it's so rewarding.
Going back to the scripture, the first real step is about naming it, right?
Naming it,
Right, so we took this past week with We Shine, for the last 3 Thursdays, we took diversity, equity, inclusivity training, which was fabulous. And it goes as far as saying to acknowledge when microaggressions are being made, right?
Yeah.
So you've experienced some of that.
Oh, yeah, and I think... the microaggression piece, I think, is hard because people will brush it off. Well,
right. It sounds nice, right? It usually sounds nice.
Yeah.
So how do you understand microaggression?
So microaggression can, how do you put that into words? How do you understand a microaggression? Is a person intentionally trying to be kind, but there's an underlying offhandedness or undermining.
It undermines your power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like somebody will say, this was an example from class. A black woman gave the example. She said, and I made the microaggression. She said, I was in a Uber car, and I said to the immigrant driver, you know, you really speak English really well. And he turned around and he
Right.
goes, so do you.
Right.
That was
right.
the perfect
Yes,
answer, right?
yes,
Right? But
yes,
that
yes.
idea of that sounding like I'm giving you a compliment puts you on the place of
Yeah.
a higher place that I can give you a compliment. Right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think it happens every day. I mean,
it happens all the time.
And I know I've done it. And when I catch myself, I apologize for it immediately. And that takes a lot of work sometimes, is being willing to catch yourself, being willing to apologize. But once you get into the routine of it,
Right.
it's actually an easy thing for human relations.
And not to apologize, just apologize. You don't have
Yeah.
to go into like I meant
It's no big
well,
deal.
or you know,
No.
this is what I really. No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That sounded really stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was there was a restaurant the other day where there was an individual, and I couldn't tell their gender, and we have a nibbling. That's a gender neutral term for niece or nephew,
Okay.
and so I'm pretty used to trying really hard to be very cognizant of people's pronouns. Really important to me, and I just said something very simple like, "Oh, I really love that dress on her." And then I turned around, I was like, "I'm so sorry. I think I got your pronouns incorrect, didn't they?" And they just looked around and they're like, "Yeah, I prefer they or he, but thank you so much for stopping and
Just
acknowledging."
saying, yeah.
And then that was it. That was
Yeah,
the conversation. They smiled. We had a nice smile. They went about their business. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, learning moment.
Mhm.
I'm human. Here we go.
Yeah.
Keep moving on."
Yeah.
And then later on, as they were leaving, they're like, "Thanks again for acknowledging that." And I said, "Absolutely. Where'd you get your dress?" And then it was a human interaction
Sure.
beyond
And you
that
know what? We're
piece.
going to make mistakes.
We're going to make
And
mistakes.
I had to start to get over that, right? Because we have Rune from the micro village, and she's going through the process of being transgender and the
Okay.
hormone therapy. And I just love them to pieces. And she walked in one day, and I said, "Hey, lady, how you doing?" I'm like, "Oh my God, did I just say that?" I said, "Rune," I said, "I'm so sorry." She went like this, like,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah,
We
we're
do-
going to do it, and I think that shows that we don't always have it right, right?
We don't. But if you show up with love, just say, "Oh, I made a mistake." You correct it right away and acknowledge a person for who they are, whatever microaggression you just did. The English one, like, "Wow, you speak English really well." I've totally done that one. And I'm like, I wanted to compliment you. I did that in the wrong way. I'm sorry. And then usually you just move on. Because people can see the intention. The intention is love. The
Right.
intention is
Right.
caring.
But I think also when it hits you, and they call them mosquito bites, when you
Yes.
get one directed at you.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I could feel my neck bristle.
Yeah.
It's important at that point, instead of harboring a really bad feeling, to
Yeah.
say something. And you can
Yeah.
just say, you know, that just didn't really sit with me well.
Yeah.
And I think back to Forest Grove, one of my most first and hurtful microaggressions was when I came. I don't even remember the person's name, nor would I out the person.
Okay.
But somebody said something about my New York accent. And then they went on, and every Sunday was an opportunity. And at some point, other people were saying, you know, maybe that's a little hurtful. But I
Interesting.
just really sucked it up. You know, I was like, I'm going to just suck this up. But it was hurtful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would have never thought of that being hurtful. In fact, one of the ways I was describing you to my husband Ruben on the way in today, I said, "Diane has this amazing New York accent." I said, "It's the accent that comes with that understood attitude of you're just not going to take any, any stuff from someone." So I hear the accent, and to me, I'm like, it emboldens and empowers. And then I went on to describe more of who you are as a person. Right. But to have it harped on is an interesting thing to think about.
And then somebody in the group said, you know, because I used that as an example in the class,
Yeah.
somebody in the group said, "Well, I went to New York, and I think he was originally from Kansas, and I got the same thing."
Oh, gosh,
And I
yeah.
said, and see, that's the point.
Yeah.
We're always looking to point out at differences.
Yeah.
So then I could sit in my place and say, well, I think my way is a little bit better than your way. That's when microaggressions are really problematic.
That
when
is.
you're willing to camp out in your own tribe and just say, well, this is the way it needs to be done.
Right.
So that's why we really can't call the United States a melting pot. Because
No. Everybody's
would
looking
you
for
want to be in a
othering.
melting pot?
No.
Yeah, because the melting pot means we're going to meld into each other.
Yeah. You kind of forgive and forget or let go of your own history and heritage. Or instead, it's an inclusive understanding and amalgamation of things coming together. And you learn from each other, but you still have what brings you to your core and your history.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you did not go to church, so you
No.
obviously were never taught anything about this passage.
Well, I was taught that I wasn't an okay person, right? Because this is a passage that was used against me.
You didn't
Even though I
deserve.
didn't grow up in church, I learned about this passage on the outside. Our church is doing deconstruction circles right now.
Great.
And it's interesting. It's hard work, and it's interesting to sit there and listen about the transgressions from Christian church. And at first I thought, I was like, oh yeah, yep. Because I actually didn't want to go into church. When I first went into UCC, I was asked by a professor to go, because I'm a Spanish speaker, and they were doing international Vespers, and they were doing this program with all these different languages, and there wasn't a local Spanish speaker that they had connections to. And long story short, I met with the pastor there, and I was like, I can't come into your church. Like, the place is going to get hit by lightning. It didn't matter that I grew up in a science-based family, and I supported loving every single person. I was just terrified that bad things would happen to other people because of me.
Right, like you opened Pandora's box.
Yeah,
so to speak,
right? And they were
yeah,
like, well,
I
come
know
on
that
anyway,
feeling.
and if something happens, it just stays between you and me. I'm thinking everything's going to be fine. And I happened to go, I was like, okay. Because I wanted to serve. I wanted to help support this process that they were doing. I thought it was so cool, bringing all these languages in a service. And I'd been going to a Christian group on campus, but I was really being dampened down. I wanted the community. I wanted the spiritual community. And I saw our high school teacher, a music teacher from elementary school, and I was like, wait, her daughter's a lesbian. I'm super confused about all this. And I just saw this house of worship filled with love and acceptance. I was like, wait, what? So it took this whole passage and turned it upside down for me, where what I had learned from this passage was you're other and you're not good enough.
Right.
It was, no, you're here, you're with us, and let's move forward in love. And so it really...
So it was really speaking about what you're losing and what you're not belonging to is the status quo way of the system.
Right.
It really is not on a personal level as far as who you are.
Shifting that meaning.
And so much, I think, of church teaching has been pointed towards belief system and the idea of personal salvation, when Hebrew text was really about the community and how we're going to reconcile this community.
Yeah,
Tikkun
absolutely.
Olam. That's what the Jewish people, the prophetic.
Yeah, and if you stop and you think about living Christ-like, I mean, I don't know if I believe in the concept of heaven as this eternal utopia your soul gets to live in beyond hand, but if you're engaging and doing the right thing and living in right relationship, gosh, life on earth feels a lot better.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think
exactly.
So that's what that means for me personally is sitting forward and am I doing the right thing? Am I doing something that's going to infringe on somebody else's rights? Or am I empowering? Am I supporting my fellow human beings in being seen and being heard and being valid, because they are just as important as I am, because we are all here together.
And we're not inviting you to the table because we tolerate you.
Right, we're inviting you because you deserve to be here, because you are here, you are human, and you have a heartbeat, and we love you. And that is the important piece for me. So I hear this scripture, and I think about what happened, and I see the scripture as what it can be.
Exactly.
And it's not about deserving. That word is just, it's so
when
hard.
I saw
right?
that, I
You're just
said,
like, oh gosh.
Eugene Peterson, really? You and your group put deserving in there? As wow.
But everybody is deserving. Yeah.
You know, I learned something in, I learned a couple of things when I did spiritual formation. One of the things was to be a good spiritual director or spiritual leader or companion, whatever we want to phrase that as, to really learn to meet people where they are, right? Because when we superimpose possibilities for them or changing or whatever, we're not really embracing the full person.
Right.
But then there was a conversation we had about the nature of God. Like, we'll never really fully grapple with the holy mystery, right? Because God is not this white-haired man up in heaven like us, whatever, judging every people.
Right.
But they said the conversation said that if you realize that everything, including those things you push out of your way, are facets of God, like everything is a facet of God.
Mm-hmm.
Even the things we dislike the most,
Right.
even the things that we will speak and refuse to be silent about, those are still aspects of God.
Absolutely.
So it kind of puts it in, okay, so we refuse to be silent, but it's always with the slant of restoring.
Yeah.
And I think so much of our justice and our protests misses that point sometimes.
Yeah, it does.
It's my way or the highway, or, like morally I'm right, ethically I'm right, and what are we going to do about this?
Yeah, it us versus thems
Mhm,
all over the
mhm.
place instead
Yeah.
of how do we all move forward together.
So I'd like to look at the verse, and I'm taking
Yeah.
this from the traditional wording,
Uh-huh.
not his wording.
Sure.
Whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it.
Right.
Now, I understand that in a very deep spiritual
Yeah.
thing, but
Yeah.
but what was your initial how you were taught about this? What did you think about this when you heard this passage?
Yeah, it takes me back to school where I didn't go to church, so I wasn't worthy. I was going to go to hell. I was a horrible person. And that's just what it takes me to, you are other, you are not welcome here, it is not okay, you are not an okay person. And now engaging in a faith community that's very open and progressive, I really shift to more of that inner peace of, whoever doesn't take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. I don't hear it that way. I hear it so much as if you don't take up the cross and engage in helping right the wrongs, right, then there's a missing piece of spiritual growth and opportunity. But I had to dig deep for that one.
Right,
And
right, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really hard passage.
Yeah,
It has
and
a lot of
when
gut
what's really
wrenching.
hard for me is, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. I don't like that
Right.
that notion of, and I on a spiritual level I understand it, but the lose part, lose your life. You have
Yeah.
to lose your life. So that sets up the Christian for being this like super martyr,
Right.
And church does this for people. We do
Right.
that, and we lose everything we have for the sake of others.
Right.
And that is not interconnected or interdependent at all. That still
No.
sets up the we versus them.
Yeah, and it sets up the conquering
Yeah.
mindset too
Mhm,
of we must overcome and force and show this is the way to be. And that brings down so much opportunity for conversation and for coming togetherness and for learning about other people, because it really instills that my way or the highway,
Right.
where I'm like, really?
And it's more about today, about the church doing work with the community, not for the community.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Have to open those doors and get people in, whether they're coming on Sunday morning or not.
Right. And we have
All
to
are
be
welcome
out there
here.
and doing
And
work
be out there.
on
Yeah.
the streets. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in refusing to be silent about injustice,
Yeah.
how has this played out in your vocational and personal life?
Yeah. So I think about, the work on the houseless issues, and even though I'm not fully engaged in it now, speaking up, trying to educate a little bit here and there. I think recognizing microaggressions, and so working with clients. I have a few clients that I've worked with recently in the last few years who come from Native American backgrounds. And so first off, just acknowledging, and when I have my first meeting with them, they usually have a history of trauma. And so putting all of my papers off on the side and saying, okay, how do I best support you? Would you like to share if there's a nation that you are a member of? What are you hoping for today? How can I support you? And then I had a supervisor who was saying, you're spending too much time, or you're writing too much about this piece of this person's history. It's like, no, this is who this person is. So sometimes it's pushing back to supervisors and saying, we need to acknowledge the whole person in order to serve
Yeah.
the person. Just because they have a tribal membership does not make them less for services. I remember working with students and in the correctional facility. And there were a couple of students that at beginning were kind of scared. And like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go in a correctional facility. These people are going to be so mean to me. I don't know about this. And they're going to work just these low wage jobs. And so having conversations right up front about what are your fears? What are you afraid of coming into this population? What are the stigmas you've heard? What are the judgments you've heard? So we always had kind of an orientation about what have you heard? And here's my experience to help dampen some of that.
Right.
And then they would learn pretty quickly that when they would go into that room and introduce themselves on a first name basis and start the first class or group we always had was you'd play games, because there was no where students were residents or inmates. There was, hey, we're people playing games. And by the end, every single person in that room saw a level of equality. And so that the residents, when the students came in and did their groups, they wanted to support the students in doing well. And they even would say, that was a rough one, but if you did this next time.
Well, I like that, because that sets up like the question about the poem, about injustice being silent and justice being not silent. So is there ever a time that silence is more appropriate than speaking up, do you think?
You know, that's a hard one, and I will say yes, because, I mean, let's think about the example. If you're the breadwinner for your family, and speaking up is going to put your entire family's well-being at jeopardy.
So you would be Thomas More, and be killed because you couldn't profess something as far as the belief in the Catholic.
There's going to be a way where you have to think about everything at stake. And at the same time, if there's a way to gently, maybe not be the full professing, but kind of poke and prod and ask the question that will engage more people in a conversation. But if you're going to profess and then be killed, and then your family's going to be destitute or off to the side and not have
That's
what the
the
basic
martyr
needs.
syndrome.
It's not okay, right? But if you're in a workplace and someone's microaggressing over and over and over against somebody, oh my gosh, step up, say something. If there's a supervisor that's not in agreement with that, then go above their head. And if that means you have to leave that job, start working for something else. Start looking for something else. There's stuff out there. And it's easier said than done.
Of course,
totally easier said than done.
Yeah.
But personally, I've been there.
Well, I like what you said about when everybody got together and they played games instead of talking. They did something together. There's a way to, I think, silently get to injustice in a way that people sometimes have to creatively and intentfully look for.
Yeah, and then what was cool about that whole experience is at the end of the summer, one of the students who was most afraid at the beginning of the time was talking about having gone home for the weekend before, and was talking about her experience and naming off places that intentionally hire to give second chances, and that they'd been learning about from the residents. And their parents were like, oh wow, we should patron these places more often to support this. We didn't know this was a thing. And so it was like, that just reached another family, and now it reached another level, and now they're going to talk to their friends. And so it helps build some empathy, but also learning and then breaking down those rigid or judgmental barriers that people have. They're learning. She got to go and talk to them about, like, well, actually, these are really hard things that these people, when they graduate from this program and they have to reintegrate into society, these are the steps are against them already. These are the knocks against them.
And it's meeting them where they're at, too.
Yeah. And it was amazing. And so she's like, oh, wow, I think I actually maybe want to look at being an OT in justice systems. I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah. It made me think of also, there's an author that I follow, and she does social work, and she's a psychiatrist and a spiritual leader. And she speaks about a time when she was living in, I think, rural Miami, someplace down south. And she had incarcerated young men. And her job was to point out the things they didn't know about the system, like they couldn't read, so you have to teach them to read,
Yeah.
and really hone in on them
Yeah.
what they lacked.
Yeah.
So this really had a justice right thing to it, so they wouldn't get back into
Right.
jail, whatever.
Right.
So she had one young man, and his passion was playing chess.
Oh, yeah.
And she
Okay.
said he was brilliant, because when we'd have a conversation, she wouldn't just start off with, hey, I think you're illiterate. Like, what do you really like to do? And what do you do most of the time? He did all these chess games, and he was like the champion of his gang and whatever. So he played. So she said to him, she said, well, I'm going to challenge you. I'd love to play chess with you. And deep down, she knew she was a bad chess player. She said, but she bargained on herself, and she said,
Sure.
let's play chess, and if I win, she said probably was
Probably
never
not
going
going
to
to happen,
happen,
right? Yeah.
I'll start to teach you how to read this history book over here. And his eyes lit up because he really wanted to beat her. So they play chess, and she wins.
Oh, my gosh.
So the roundabout way, though,
Yeah.
of getting towards the fact that he was illiterate
Yeah.
and making a game out of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
she didn't have to come out and say anything like, I refuse to work with you, or
Right.
whatever. She just played chess with him.
Yeah.
And by the luck of God, she won.
It's awesome. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? You have some notes there.
Oh, it was just little moments about trying to remind myself, because I knew you were going to ask me these questions. I think we can't be silent.
Mm-hmm.
We can't. Whether it's a small thing or a big thing, whether it's an interaction we see in a store, or it's a bigger, rallies or whatnot. I think if we're really engaging in our Christian belief system,
Mm-hmm.
we can't be silent.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's with one other person or in a large group. And it's scary sometimes.
very
It is
scary.
scary. So finding allies is really important.
Mhm.
But I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity. Hope I did this justice. No pun intended.
So what are your hopes for Emberly?
Oh my gosh. Emberly, I hope that she continues to be the fiery, confident spirit that she is. I mean, we came into the building and she just ran in here got the microphone and started doing her thing before you got here this morning. And there was a part of me that was like, oh my gosh, we're guests. And then there was a part of me that was like proud. She knew to come in and she wanted to take her place.
Mm-hmm.
And she wanted to run the place. I hope that she learns to do this with a balance of empathy and sharing with others.
Mhm.
She's 5. But my hopes for her is that she won't have to deal with the microaggressions that I've had to deal with, that she will be seen as a confident woman, and that her spirit won't be pushed down and dampened by society.
It's all about the spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, back to, this was a long time ago,
Mhm.
bringing up our son, and when he was 5, I've often said that his dad and I are more of the type A, follow the rules type person.
Yep.
But little 5-year-old David sang by his own little
Yes.
tune, and he was like
Yes.
aloof and just would go around and look at things, and would be like, and I was like, wow. I think back to how like I was brought up, and it was like,
Oh, yeah.
whip into shape and do what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
There was a time that he went off to China with a baseball team. My mother-in-law didn't want him to go. My parents were sending him by himself. He wasn't going by himself. He was
Sure.
going, with people.
Yeah.
And we get to the airport when they're coming in, and the whole team comes off the plane in their uniform with their baseball gear, and they look like little soldiers. No, David. We start fighting, my husband and I. I told you we shouldn't have sent him. We're screaming back and forth. It got so bad, Tori. We had to go and ask one of the attendants, is everybody off that plane? She says, I think so. I'm like, oh my God, he stayed in China, right? 16.
Right. Yeah.
3 minutes later, after sweating, heart pounding, here comes David with a rice patty hat on, a sweatshirt, and flip-flops. He got off that plane. I wanted to kill him, but I did not. And I just said, oh,
Right.
David, it's so good to see you.
Yeah.
But that was a constant decision
Yeah.
that we had to make. Like, are we going to dampen somebody else's spirit for the sake of making me feel safe and comfortable?
Right. No.
Yeah.
And all the elders in our church look at her and they're like, she's good. She'll go up in the middle of Pastor Brendan's sermon, and she'll go up and just give him a hug on the leg. And after the first time it happened, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. She probably broke your focus. He's like, anytime. It's all good. Don't worry about it. And I think we need to give our children that space.
And more than our children, I think we need to do it to
ourselves,
each other,
right?
here, right?
Ourselves,
To let that spirit be okay with itself.
Yeah. I think, she's asking questions about slavery already. Because we read a book about Martin Luther King Jr. in the march, and she's asking, why do people treat each other this way? And and there was a moment I was like, oh my God, my 4-year-old's asking about slavery. Oh, my 4-year-old's asking about slavery. Cool. How cool is this?
Right.
So I hope for her that she continues to have curiosity and that nobody dampens that down for her. And we're just going to help try to guide her. But she's clearly her own. She's coming to do some big things. And I just want her to be supported in that.
Great.
She's got a big community to support her.
Yeah,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Would you read the poem back to us?
Sure.
I think I gave you a copy. You have it?
Injustice is Always a Quiet Thing by Sarah Warden, a sonnet for the American uprising. Injustice is always a quiet thing, interested only in more power, and justice carves through hope's feathery wing. It cuts through heart and pretends not to sting. As it approaches its final hour, injustice is always a quiet thing. All of the Nazi thugs to which they cling cannot protect the rich up in their tower. Injustice carves through hope's feathery wing. A time for continuous reckoning when fake promises have grown too sour. Justice has never been a quiet thing. We rise and convention does not cling. Rebellion has come with a red flower. Justice stitches up hope's feathery wing. All of us need this American spring. History has built us to this hour. Justice has never been a quiet thing. Justice stitches up hope's feathery wing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I look forward to fellowship so I can have more Vimberly.
Likewise. Thank you.